Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in a physical level Earth location, though one unfamiliar to my personal self. As it transpired, I would actually be in America, and although I determined the precise location and state during the experience, I failed to bring it through to the physical on waking. I appeared to have elected to take a trip to America, and had only seemingly just arrived, as I would be in an airport and preparing to depart for whatever business I had here. Accompanying me during this initial phase of the experience would be a female, but she would not feature beyond the opening scene, impressions suggesting she was a real guide. The airport itself, although an enclosed structure, boasted large windows that afforded a good view of the environment beyond. And indeed, suddenly would 3 disc-shaped craft glide across the skies, approaching from the south, then obscured by the ceiling of the airport as they passed over it, only to be visible again as the larger windows on the north side of the building allowed. Impressions would reveal that these craft were piloted by body forms that were not human, and that the aliens were seeking specific humans, although nothing as to the reason or their motivation for doing so was made apparent at this stage of the experience. I had the strong sense that I was the singular individual they sought, that was present in the particular state of America I was in, but undoubtedly there would be others positioned across the globe they also were seeking. I had come to America for a completely alternative reason, the impression being for simply sightseeing purposes, that although I had no real interest in taking an excursion to the States, the compulsion had been there to do so. And revealed now was the actual reason for my trip, an arranged engaging with the aliens and their craft, perhaps more a subconsciously planted drive that I was seemingly unconscious of, but which had compelled me to be in America at a predetermined moment where rendezvous with these aliens would be possible. Why the contact location hadn't been my own country of the UK, as this would have been more convenient, who can say? But this was the situation. Interestingly, it seemed that no other human participant in the scene, the large numbers mingling and going about their business in the airport, were aware of the three craft, despite they being very apparent, relatively large, of around 40 feet or so, I would estimate, and not especially subtle. It wasn't simply a case that all present were, say, unobservant, more that the craft didn't seem to feature in their experience, as though beyond their ability to perceive. I would endeavour to vacate the airport, but on exiting, and as I scanned the skies, I would see no sign of the three craft. What claimed my attention instead were that the planes of the airport, in their various stages of arrival and departure elevations, were seemingly spinning out of control and crashing to the ground, as though all were suddenly rendered absent of power, suggesting that an electromagnetic event of some kind had disrupted the power required and had resulted in the planes of the airport being sent spiralling to the earth. I have seen this phenomena on previous real-side experiences I have shared, for the assorted reasons such was occurring, usually as part of a greater event taking place, generally along the dastardly dark force controller instigated lines. It was actually rather exhilarating, despite the serious nature of the situation, and for the passengers of the plane, for necessary was it for me to muster extreme spatial awareness, that I would avoid being crushed by the many planes crashing and exploding about me as they skidded or tumbled into their final resting positions. Nothing was revealed at that moment as to the cause or reason for this situation, or indeed if it was an isolated event involving only the airport I was in, or was a more widespread phenomenon. A positional miscalculation almost had me flattened by the final plane that smashed to the ground. I rather had to dive to the side and would fall into a deep ditch. There would be another individual now present, a male in his later teens, and would extend a hand and assist me in extrication from my predicament. As I was unable to clamber from the ditch myself, the plane had come to rest over it and was blocking my ability to reach the surface easily. Impressions would reveal that what had transpired with the planes and the airport was a precursor to further events yet to occur, and that this particular American estate was ground zero, so to speak, a chosen position for the beginning of what would soon unfold and indeed be a globally impacting scenario. And indeed, moments later, as the individual who had assisted me would remain in my company as we removed ourselves from the airport and began to traverse through the neighbouring streets surrounding it, so would the next phase of the overall event take place. As suddenly two mechanical body forms would manifest before us, rather diminutive in comparison to the average adult human of approximately 3 feet or so in height. They would be entirely comprising of a metallic element, nothing of them was organic, and consist of tubular domes that presented as though the heads and mobility was afforded via mechanical tentacle-like appendages that emerged from the base. They seemed friendly and would engage with us. My impressions were that they were somewhat basic, as though a more rudimentary version of their kind, but they had the ability to communicate, utilizing all and any required human language. Despite their agreeable nature, further impressions suggested an insidious, underlying intentionality, and I would express my concerns to my newly acquired companion. This seemed to infuriate the robotic creatures. Evidently, they were capable of expressing emotion, of creating the sensations of anger, etc., irrespective of their body types being mechanical, and would become rather aggressive and bombard me with all manner of colourful human expletives. They would scuttle from us and be suddenly shadowed by another of their kind, an enormous robotic mechanical of a similar design, that of an overall mass mobilized through the use of dexterous, metallic tentacle-like limbs. It was the size of the general scale of the large buildings lining the street we were in, 100 feet or so, and like the smaller robots, would communicate verbally, a voice that sounded tinny, but of a clarity that was easy to understand. Just like the smaller mechanicals, it would seem amiable enough on the surface, providing assurances as to its sincere intentions, but once again impressions would suggest the opposite, and that in reality this was the initial stages of an invasion. In actuality, then, this was a potential future view scenario in relation to humanity and the Earth. Over the years, I have been chronicling the various potentialities that for anything, any event to take place in the experience of an entire species, so must the idea of the event be installed in the collective consciousness of said species. Creation is based on cause-to-effect principles, the consciousness being the engine room of experience, and for any effect to be so, it is via the mechanics of the body forms, the idea generating mind, emotion, and imaginative body vehicle faculties, that these ideas become consciousness placed, either individually or collectively, and effected also from consciousness are the body forms themselves that decode these ideas into a simulation thus experienced. In actuality, then, we each decide our experience, we either generate our own ideas, or we agree with the ideas as created by others, and where the same cause-to-effect principle applies, the ideas become a consciousness installed, and we experience their simulated and manifested nature. The dark force controllers have already gleaned agreement through the overall human consciousness from the very first moments of the re-engineering of the human species, and where initial control was established. The foundation of the human consciousness, then, is of agreement acquiescence, an idea that effects as the ability of the dark forces to exercise this afforded agreement and maintain control of the human race. For this foundation of control to be built upon, for the agendas for continued suppression to be so, and including the dark forces' want to now depopulate and even completely genocide the human species, these are additional ideas that must be agreed with and inserted into human consciousness. Effectively, humanity must agree with its own perpetual enslavement and indeed eradication, and there are many means and mechanisms of installing such ideas that, were they presented as they actually are, certainly would not be openly accepted. Installation, then, of the dark force desired ideas are more along the subliminal lines, television predictive programming being a prime candidate, and the presenting of ideas that seem to have a beneficial merit but are laced with additional unseen ideas that are not surface apparent. A little like a file that is tainted with a computer virus that we inadvertently upload and then suffer the effect consequences for. Intentionality is an idea as any other, and should I accept an idea as created by an individual whose overwhelming consciousness construct is that of malicious inclination, as the idea and the consciousness it stems from are indivisible, the agreed-to creation will be accompanied by the ideas of the consciousness that forged it, and I experience then the unseen desires of said individual in relation to myself, and however they will play out accordingly. An agreement with the dark force controller's idea creation is in essence agreement to being controlled and suppressed by them, as will be their actual underlying consciousness inclination. And so, the dark forces are in the process of installing as many ideas of a depopulation nature into a human consciousness by all means available. Every idea that consciousness comprises of is in effect now, in isness reality terms, and can be shown on the real side, but through the decided construction of consciousness, as it affects the physical level, due to the inclusion of time and space limiting factors, so an idea isn't its immediate effects, there is a delay factor involved. For an idea to play out on the physical, it must be maintained in prominence, above all other ideas present in consciousness, long enough to be processed to physical level actuality. And if another idea jostles to the forefront, it is the equivalent of switching the movie before the end can be determined and a new movie begin to process through to completion. All movies complete in their entirety on their respective discs, but the DVD players, just like the physical level body forms that decode the idea agreements into a simulation, must process these already completed movies to a conclusion to the effect. Hence why so many ideas of a population depleting nature are being installed, as I have been revealing the various versions over the years, that the controllers hope then will result in at least one of them being processed through to actualization. As I mentioned, what was taking place in this experience was in actuality an invasion by these mechanical beings. The idea that this could be so was an agreement that had been secured in overall human consciousness by whatever means this had been achieved, and as this is the most current view I have received in regards to humanity as a species, this indicates this event as among the ideas currently being held to in prominence and processing through to physical manifestation, although if it comes to pass is dependent on the agreement idea being maintained as the forerunner, as I mentioned, but as it transpired a little like the movie series V, where the reptilians posed as Earth's benefactors, but had other, more insidious agendas. These mechanicals were presenting themselves as peaceful, extending positive intentions and mutually agreeable collusion with humanity, where the human race would benefit as according to the robot beings, but in reality their plot was that of a takeover. Although, given that their initial arrival at the specific location in America had heralded a curious EMF situation which had caused the damage that it had, that either the two events hadn't been realized as being connected, or had been explained to the satisfaction of humanity as perhaps being inadvertent or accidental. Which of the options, or however such a disaster was smoothed over, wasn't made apparent, but the mechanicals were accepted as part of humanity. The Earth now shared by two distinct, predominant species, the humans and the mechanoids. Impressions would maintain that the mechanicals would gradually take control of the Earth and progressively suppress humanity in whatever way they eventually decided. In the meantime, this experience would reveal their integration into the human experience. Their presence, globally widespread and overwhelmingly accepted, but for a small scattering of humans who harboured mistrust, a number that was increasing as the moments passed. And I rather would gather these humans to myself, constantly assuring the group that their suspicions were not groundless, based on my real awareness impressions afforded as to the mechanicals' actual intentions. The mechanicals had by now secured globally a number of humans that were working on their behalf as though an extension of them that were willing to carry out clandestine covert operations. This would include seemingly the locating of any human that was revealed as harbouring doubts or reservations as to the sincerity of the mechanicals, and injecting them with a microscopic device designed primarily for tracking purposes, but very likely had other functions also. For indeed, would one of these human agents approach the group and myself, seat himself beside me, insert a needle in my neck, delivering the technological device, and then swiftly depart. As it transpired, one of the group knew of an individual who very likely could remove this device safely from my neck, and that would then be our next course of action. As I said, an intended takeover, but executed that it was seemingly anything but on the surface. The view afforded to me was of this plot in its initial stages and infancy, and stands then as a potentiality. The mechanicals themselves were indeed body forms, where the secondary personal self had been created, and being utterly embraced, their consciousness of a warlike dominating nature, much like the reptilians, and their chosen mechanism of domination seemed to be more subtle and less apparent, until reaching a point where it must be glaringly obvious, but in theory by then it would be too late. What fate the mechanicals ultimately had in store for humanity wasn't revealed, if it was simply for the thrill of domination, or there was another purpose, but for certain an idea that would be of no benefit for the human race. Impressions would reveal the reptilian controllers were not in affiliation with these mechanicals, but in this particular idea agreement potentiality, it seemed the reptilians were either unable or unwilling to attempt its prevention. As I mentioned earlier, the controllers desire depopulation, and perhaps this was simply deemed another viable means for such an outcome, even if executed by the hands of those not in association with the Dark Force reptilians. Where this experience began, so featured were the three disc-shaped alien craft. and although the exact nature of the occupants, the body types, of what indeed were aliens, were never unveiled, they were not in collusion with the mechanicals, as impressions also revealed. Over the years has been chronicled the real side accounts of the possibility of the alien Armada event, where a fleet of craft representing a vast number of assorted species, all of the becoming more aware persuasion that as part of their agreed-to stepping-up action and as arranged by the guides, so they intend to make their presence known on a global Earth scale and ideally bring humanity into their confederation of awareness-embracing species. That this can occur is again subject to agreement with all involved, but as has been revealed are various versions that this Armada event may take if the ideal option of integrating humanity as an entire species isn't viable, due to the control factors that the dark forces represent and maintain, and the extent by which they can interfere and disrupt this endeavour according to agreement parameters as set by humanity. One of the versions would involve a relocation of only certain humans, that the Armada initiative wouldn't be totally in vain, for as the deciders we must have extended agreements that others can feature in our experiences and carry out their decided actions. Humanity must allow the Armada to not only feature in their experience, but that they can indeed become as a part of their awareness confederation. If the controllers maintain their grip on humanity, and therefore the human consciousness, so they will be able to interfere with the ideal Armada event scenario, as agreements sustained in relation to the dark forces and their power will serve to perpetuate the overall controlled foundation of the human experience, and prevent the ability to be afforded alternative circumstances. If I hold to the idea agreement of perpetual suppression, then my creational position and circumstances will remain. Only if the ideas effecting such are released can other options be possible, and a version of the Armada event then involves the extracting of those who have extinguished these consciousness controller extended agreements, the individuals embracing of their awareness process, which entails a releasing of the consciousness idea construct. In this real side experience and potential humanity overall scenario then, the dark forces had maintained control of human consciousness, and the suppression then of the species. The mechanicals had stepped in as agreements further allowed and began their takeover operation, but featuring also would be the alien Armada. That although in such a scenario the human race overwhelmingly had resigned themselves to their position of restriction and domination, those that were as part of the human race, but on their processes of awareness, had released the prerequisite agreements, allowing themselves alternative options. That craft, as a part of the Armada fleet, could be dispatched and extract these certain individuals and remove them from an Earth that would soon be descending into mechanical controlled tyranny. Where this has been the option as revealed in previous experiences, it isn't simply that the Armada extract the awareness becoming humans, but that they are only perceptible to them, that to the vast majority of humanity, the rescuing craft and the Armada they are a part of isn't visible, as though the dark force controlled human consciousness effects a blocking perceptual mechanism, denying such humans the ability to perceive the entirety of the physical dimension they should be experiencing, and within this imperceptible portion of the frequency range of the physical earth dimension, will the armada then operate and extract those that have released the agreements, and thus facilitating this option. As was made apparent where this experience began, the impression of the 3 alien vessels specifically seeking myself, and where their craft were only visible to me. And so, in the final analysis, we have the various factors and variables involved, the dark forces, the armada, and now a race of ill-intended dominating mechanicals thrown into the mix. What transpires with all this, with each respective individual and species, all according to the placement of consciousness-installed agreement in relation to each other, and remains then as another potentiality. But as I mentioned, it is my most recent view pertaining to the plight of humanity, and will be then the idea being processed through to physical level actuality as agreements currently stand, unless another agreement secures the top prominent spot and the human movie is switched again for an alternative.